Welcome back to the Imaginary Gallery. It's TJ, your host. We're in the Narcissist bag of tricks. But this time it's going to be a little different. It's a mixed bag. It's a different approach. It's using the narcissist creature's behavior and learning from it. I'll be providing a few examples of how this works. If you're going to have your life disrupted by one of these creatures, you might as well learn something from it. And hopefully they'll help you if you find that you're dealing with such a creature or fear that you might be. The first example, these creatures are fake. Now, I've always been real and would never think to make my entire life be a fabricated lie like these creatures do. But that has caused problems for me in the past because in public, I'm usually pretty shy or submissive, which means I'm an easy target for narcopaths, as well as those creatures, the living dead, the walking dead that you see on the street. When you go to a parking lot and they come up, excuse me. In previous days, I would be like, yeah, and I would actually look at them and interact. But I've learned, if they make eye contact with you many times, they've got you. And they will do whatever they do. They tell you that they've got a family, got a child who's dying, and they need money for the bus. The truth is, they've got a car down the street the whole family lives in. They're making up stories. There was one night that I was at a particular nightclub with a friend. We were sitting outside having our pre-soft drinks before going in. And while sitting there, one of those creatures walked up to the car, and I unrolled the window just a little. And
excuse me.
And I didn't want to deal with that, but at the same time, I wasn't going to be aggressive evil, so I just said, no thanks. No thanks, and shut the window, which I guess was kind of smart, Alec, and this creature didn't like that. After I did that, this creature then took some device, I don't know what it was, like a key, and I heard a scrape. So basically, it was saying, hey, can I have some money? And if the answer is no, then I'm going to scrape your car up. Luckily, it wasn't a car I was that concerned about. I could see if it was something really special and expensive, I might just automatically become furious, but I didn't, because it wasn't really a concern. I know there'd be a lot of people who would, like, slam that door out and grab the person, strangle them, and knock them over, but that's just not my style. After he did that, walked off, and I felt uncomfortable, so I parked the car elsewhere, drove around the block. That was uncalled for anyway. For it to beg for money, and then when it was told no thanks, destroy someone's property or try to. That's just one example, but I've had others where people end up speaking way more than they should. When they're wanting money, I don't have it to give them. Well, I thought about my narcissist creatures that I've been involved with and how they seem to use fakery to their advantage. And I figured, well, wouldn't it be instructive if I could learn from these creatures and get a lesson out of what they've done, the fakery, but of course not to become a fake person and try to manipulate people and control them into doing things that they wouldn't normally do, but instead to use it for like a self-defense or self-preservation. I figured I'll just try this. The situation was I was going to meet a specific person at a parking lot which was in a kind of rough area where you're likely to see those walking dead creatures all over the place, which I knew, but I hoped I wouldn't have to encounter any. But that particular night I was driving in the parking lot and found a little space, and sure enough, one of those creatures appeared out of the woodwork. Zombies started walking towards the car, and this time I used the Narcopath narcissist creature's behaviors, and I decided I don't want to get taken advantage of. I don't want to get keyed. I don't want to have any problems. So I made this face that was really mean. I was also thinking, and it helped inspire the face, thinking, who do these people think they are? Just coming up to a stranger, I work 40 hours a week, and they think I'm just going to hand out I was thinking of all that, and I made a face like, and I drove up, and it looked, excuse me, and I did that face, and it was funny because the creature went like this, oh, I'm sorry, no, never mind. It walked off, so it scared it. I guess I learned something good came out of the Narcopath creature. You can take from their sickening bag of tricks and use their methods just revamped for a self-protection type situation rather than deceptive. Second example, I'd been with a long-term creature. As a result of that, learned that I don't think I ever want to get involved in something like that again unless it's really right. And I had a creature coming up after just a few weeks trying to be all close and I want to move in, I want to live with you and all this stuff, and we barely even knew each other. I had learned my lesson, which these creatures don't. But I had learned that you don't want to rush into anything with anybody, especially after the decade you lost of your life. This creature was pushing and trying to convince me, like they always like to do. If you come across as shy or standoffish based on previous experiences, they'll be the first to tell you, oh, what'd your ex do? Oh, I would never do that. And I heard all that crap too. The point of it was the whole situation was being pushed by the other person. I was going along with it somewhat, but I would be sure to disclose and say, look, if you want to do things, we can, but don't be expecting any marriage or anything like that. We just met, and I'm getting over this problem I was involved with, and the person, of course, pretended to be,
oh, I understand.
So I figured, oh, okay, so then I could continue. Now, of course, this person tried to do things more often than it should, like daily, which I had to push back somewhat. This all went on where it's kind of an emotional abuse to me, because we learn later it's a creature, and here I was actually considering the person's feelings, secretly thinking that, okay, I told the person how it is, but it's still being pushy. How do I deal with that? Because I know how they work now. If I were to say, look, we've been together too much, stop, then they would be,
fine, I just won't ever talk to you again.
Or they'll say,
I can't help it, I love you, or I can't help it, but I really like being with you.
well, that's your own problem, deal with it. But they will do that kind of stuff. But this was one of those that I was crossing my own boundary lines too, because it would be kind of cruel to be that way, like shut someone down when they're trying whatever, because I know if I really like something, I wouldn't want to be shut down. But then at the same time, I know if I was pursuing something and it told me straight out that it did not want to get married or get serious, I wouldn't be shopping for wedding rings and saying, oh, let's do this and let's do that, let's move here and move there, and I would have known better. But still, I wasn't thinking that thoroughly through it. But regardless, this went on for a while, and I was keeping my distance, or trying to. But of course, the mere exposure theory, I found myself more attracted to this creature, unfortunately. Eventually, a bunch of lies became overturned. When one of the big deals was, oh, I never lie, and then like 10 big ones were revealed, it even admitted to some, and that kind of threw in a wrench, because I was thinking, okay, I didn't want to get close for a reason. This person pretended to be the perfect one, and then these 10 lies appeared, which had to do with undoing most of the words it said that it was true about itself. Like, oh, I don't look at anyone else ever, and then, oh, but I've been with 10 others, which it had every right to do, but the point was it was pretending, saying,
oh, if anyone looks at me, I don't pay attention. Oh,
and I think, oh, that's what it was doing. Well, I've learned from these creatures, they don't have empathy, and it's difficult. I told it a story that was true. Christmas season right now, it made me think of it. We were in this thing that just progressed as far as time together, so basically most of my free time was spent with this creature as far as social time, so there wasn't any opportunity for anything else at that point. And it got to the point of Christmas, this was like after 2 years, I believe, and I just remember I was buying fancy, expensive things like a game console and just big gifts, and then I was thinking about the whole thing, about how I didn't want to get involved with anybody, and now this person I'm hanging out with is just as fake as all the others. Here it is Christmas time, and I was buying these gifts thinking, this seems like a waste of time. I shouldn't be spending a fortune for this person, even though it's going to spend one too in return. I just thought, this is not the way it's supposed to be. When I was a child, I didn't think, when I grow up, I want to find somebody who's fake and lies and pretends to be this, and if I express my insecurities, to say, oh, none of those apply to it, and then trample on all of them. No one ever expects that or wants that. But I learned after all this stuff had gone on, which I didn't realize what I was dealing with yet completely, and tried to appeal to it. Because your brain is remembering that person at the beginning who, if you sneezed once, it would rush over with cold medicine. Things like that, where you don't even ask for something, but it picks up on it and then does it. Like, oh, I need to paint that wall. And then it shows up with a paintbrush. I brought a paintbrush to do your wall. It's just overdone. Well, I made the mistake of telling the person the feelings that I went through. The reason for this was I was assuming I was dealing with a human being because of the love bombing. That makes us think that we're dealing with a human because it's so concerned, but we didn't think, though, that if we have a problem with them, it's a whole different story. It's just external problems they will jump in and solve. But I didn't know. I thought I could appeal to it. Thought that if I heard this story, I would be saddened and I would listen and discuss. And I had brought up the story about how when I went to the big store and bought all these things, I was walking back to the car thinking, what a mess I've gotten in. It's another lying, cheating fool, and trying to convince me that it isn't. What if I would have given it a ring? Where would I be now? And it was just a horrible thought. Well, that doesn't do anything for these people. All it does for them is tell them your weaknesses, which in this case had to do with a holiday, which means it could plan some kind of evil plot for another holiday because it's gathering that I find holidays to be special or important, or they should be. Very similar example was when I was discarded from that home and I was concerned about the 2 dogs. I had my little boy that I adopted, but the other one was there, and I didn't know if this creature wanted to separate them which didn't make any sense because the two doggies had been together for their whole life, but I didn't know, so I sent an email that said something like, I can't imagine going to bed at night not having that little girl dog to my side because I liked holding her. She was sweet and fit right in my side, and I realized with that gave it ammunition, which led to it wanting to take the girl away by herself, which was miserable for me the whole time, thinking I don't trust the dog being alone in the house with that new creature it was involved with. Luckily, I got to keep both of them. But again, both times thought I could appeal to this person's humanity and that they would realize that what they're doing is wrong and maybe give a break or do something, or at least show some kind of indication that they realize what they're doing isn't the best thing, but none of that ever happened. The lesson there is, if you believe you're dealing with one, you can try, tell them how you feel, but if you get the types of responses where it indicates nobody's at home, or they just turn it back around on you rather than really listen to you like they did in the beginning, that's a clue to keep those thoughts to yourself. In fact, a long-term one that I was with, I typically would say everything on my mind and more than it wants to hear. It wouldn't say hardly anything, but at one point when I started to see how sickening things were, I would just get to points where normally I'd be going on and on about something, but I decided to try a different technique, which was, like they are, to be silent. So I did. I would just say nothing. I'd be thinking, oh, this is horrible, I can't believe this, what have I gotten into? I would just sit there and instead of my usual talk would say nothing. And guess what happens? Within minutes it's saying,
"What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you?"
Because it's expecting it, it wants it, because they're gathering every piece of information they can get to use against you later, which is not the reason we tell people or our own personal feelings and emotions. We don't want them to be used against us. Plus, later we realized they were fake the whole time, so here we were, laying ourselves all out there for them while they're trampling over it and then tipping off to the next target without a second thought. Well, that's because they were phony. They weren't a real person. We feel cheated, thinking, why did I waste that effort to be a real person for this person when it was phony? I realized the idea of keeping all of your feelings and emotions to yourself indicates you're probably not in the healthiest situation anyway, because you can't really grow with a person like that if you can't really express yourself in fear they're going to use it against you and be phony. So these types of lessons would be good to use just before you plan your escape, because there's no fixing these creatures. No matter what your intentions are, how good they are, how positive you're thinking about it, doesn't work with these creatures if it's a cluster B monster. They are who they are and they will remain that way, and as long as you don't question them, oh, they'll be perfect for you usually. In many cases, the devalue begins once you actually start to see what you're really dealing with and dare to mention it. There's no relationship that's worth anything if you can't really express yourself and trust the other person with your information and have it be mutual. These creatures are phony and they don't really feel anything. They pretend to, but then we mustn't again beat ourselves up for getting involved with such a creature, because that's what they do. It's a predator. It preys upon people. It pretends to be whoever it thinks the target wants it to be, regardless of the facts, and of course it's fake. And we had no way of knowing, especially if we question, are you phony? Is this phony? You're doing too much. You didn't have to paint my wall. What's going on here? And they'll be like,
"Oh, this is just who I am. Oh, I'm a nice person. Oh, I'm sorry you've never had anyone be nice to you."
I have, but this seems fake. But it doesn't work. No words you can say will get them to say,
"Okay, the joke's over. Yes, it's a joke. I'm fake."
They won't ever do it, so it's kind of pointless to even say. And it's best to assess on your own, which is very difficult, especially if they're in your face all the time, on your phone all the time. Take it from someone who's dealt with it. I wouldn't keep revealing information about the self if they use it against you or turn it around for evil purposes. It's just not good for your health. Hopefully this information will help you know what not to say. I wouldn't say to keep quiet forever. I wouldn't say to keep all your internal feelings private all the time. It's just if you get the indication that everything was great until you expressed a concern with something it did that a reasonable person would probably question too, yet you're getting some kind of defensive response.
"Oh, you think you're perfect," or "What, after all I've done for you, how could you get mad about this?"
Well, because it did all that fake stuff, so you could say that very thing when you caught on to it. If you're involved with this type of creature, the best bet is to get away. The longer you stick around, the longer it goes on, and the harder it is to break away from. The positive thing here is, at least I was able to use their own techniques for my own self-preservation. Even if it didn't have anything to do with them, I learned a valuable lesson and didn't get keyed a second time.
I am the Narcopath, and may I remind you, I'm a transgender lesbian.
I think I belong in Hollywood. In case you didn't know, Hollywood's full of my kind. Lots of transgenders. Many of us were transgendered in the womb, which made us less obvious. You know, when a fully biological male puts lipstick on in a wig, you can tell a lot of times it's a guy. But when they start them early, still in the womb, they don't go through those pains. And they look just like the gender they're targeting. So a male, such as Pink or Serena Williams, will be born with hormones. They'll look like a female. When they grow up older, they'll develop the right curves in the right places. Except she ain't no bodybuilder and her arms are bigger than any men I've ever seen. That's besides the point. My people are going to take over the world soon. Transhuman agenda.
Since I'm still giving confessions, I might as well tell you.
I know that you met some of my friends when we were together, and there was always a healthy distance between you and them. Yet, if you recall, I was right up close and personal with all the friends I met of yours. That's the way it's got to be with a narcopath. Because if you talk to some of those people, they might slip out some of the information I couldn't have you knowing. I triangulated. I learned that from TJ's work. I triangulated to make it so there'd always be tension between you and the friends of mine that were closest. Because I didn't want you getting buddy-buddy and comparing notes and maybe discussing something you shouldn't. It let me get away with things for far longer than I would have if you were told the truth. You didn't need to know the truth, honey. I call the shots. That's the way it works in the narcopath world. Accept it.
Hello.
She is as barren as a dry witch. Hillary Clinton.
I don't believe you know me. I don't you know my name. I don't believe the thoughts I have are only mine to blame. I don't believe in magic. It's only in the mind. I don't believe I love somebody just to pass the time. Ever be replaced. I don't believe a majesty will ever match your face. The joke is always mine, and every hand is down. I don't believe that when you die, your presence isn't found.